On a suffocating summer evening, the air in the quiet suburbs felt thick not just from the heat, but from the tension boiling beneath the surface. Lena sat in her car, parked a few houses down from his place, her once bright eyes now hollowed by sleepless nights and obsession. Just a few days ago, she would have never imagined herself here, waiting, consumed by thoughts of revenge. She and Alex had been together for 3 years, their relationship marked by deep passion, but also by an undercurrent of uncertainty. Alex was everything to her. His charming smile, the way he could make her laugh when she didn't want to. It had all felt so perfect in the beginning. But lately he had grown distant, distracted, and Lena knew why. Her suspicions were confirmed the night she saw him out with another woman. They had been at a restaurant, one that Alex always said he hated, yet there he was, leaning in close to this other. The look in his eyes, the one he used to reserve for Lena, now belonged to someone else. Lena's heart had shattered that night, but what followed was worse. The crack in her heart festered, turning into a consuming rage. She tried to confront Alex, but he brushed her off, saying it wasn't what it looked like. His words only fueled the fire. It was what it looked like. He had chosen someone else, and if she couldn't have him, no one would. She waited outside his house now, watching. She had seen him pull into the driveway an hour ago, and the lights upstairs flickered on. He was alone. The woman wasn't here, and Lena felt a sick sense of relief. It would be just them tonight. She stepped out of the car, her hands trembling, though not with fear, with anticipation. Inside her purse, she felt the cold handle of the knife she had brought. Her breath quickened as she approached the door. She knew Alex always left the back door unlocked. He trusted the neighborhood too much. Slipping inside, the house was eerily quiet, the only sound her soft footsteps on the hardwood floors. She could hear him upstairs, probably in his room. Her mind raced as she crept up the stairs, the knife now firmly in her grip. She found him sitting at his desk, facing away from the door, his computer glowing in the darkened room. For a moment she hesitated. Memories of their time together flashed through her mind. The laughter, the whispered promises. But they were drowned out by the suffocating jealousy that had taken root inside her. Lena, Alex's voice broke the silence. He had turned, seeing her silhouette in the doorway. His eyes widened in confusion, then concern. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, the knife gleaming in the dim light. His expression shifted from concern to fear as he stood up, his hands raised. "Lena, wait!" But it was too late. The fury that had been building inside her exploded. She lunged forward, the knife slicing through the air, catching Alex by surprise. He stumbled back, crashing into the desk as blood soaked his shirt. His eyes, wide with shock and pain, met hers one last time before he crumpled to the floor. Lena stood over him, panting, her hands stained with his blood. She had done it. She had taken back control. But as the reality of what she had done settled in, the room began to spin. The jealousy that had driven her to this moment now felt hollow, replaced by a crushing emptiness. The love of her life was gone, and it was her fault. She dropped the knife, falling to her knees beside Alex's lifeless body. The house was silent once more, save for her quiet sobs, as Lena realized that in her desperate attempt to hold on to him, she had lost everything. Lena stood over the body, her breath heavy, hands trembling from the shock and horror of what she had just done. Alex's blood was slowly pooling on the floor, mixing with her tears as they ran down her face. She felt as though time had frozen, but deep inside her mind, another thought began to surface. What next? The sound of sirens. She knew they would come eventually. It was inevitable, like the judgment that now loomed over her head. Still, instinct took over. She had to act. Lena began cleaning up the evidence with swift, calculated movements. She wiped down the doorknobs, carefully cleaned the knife with a kitchen towel, and threw it into a trash bag. Alex's body lay motionless. He had once been her love, her entire world. Now he was just a corpse. But she needed to think rationally. How could she leave without leaving a trace? Her eyes scanned the room, looking for any clues she might have missed. Her gaze fell on his open laptop, still glowing on the desk. She knew his password. Even though Alex had always been cautious, she knew. Thoughts of why did he choose her flickered through her mind, but now wasn't the time. She opened the laptop and began searching through his messages. It didn't take long to find the exchange between him and the other woman. They had been in contact for days. Coldly, Lena saved the messages onto a USB drive. This would be her insurance. Next, she walked into the bathroom and carefully washed the blood from her hands and face. But the panic was beginning to creep into her thoughts. Time was running out. Lena slipped out of the house through the back door, tossing the trash bag full of evidence into a neighbor's garbage bin. She walked briskly, heart pounding but keeping her head down. By the time she reached her car and drove off, her mind was focused on only one thing: escape. But escaping what she had done was impossible. Alex was dead, and though she believed she had covered her tracks, there was one undeniable truth. She knew they would come for her sooner or later. The police would find the body, they would find out about their relationship, and about the jealousy and rage that had driven her to this. There was one last step: disappear and watch as everything unraveled. Maybe they wouldn't find anything. Maybe she could live her life as if nothing had happened. But deep down, Lena knew the truth. Crimes like this don't just go away. The jealousy that had taken control of her heart had killed more than just Alex. It had destroyed her life, and now she was running. Not just from the police, but from herself. When the news of Alex's death would finally break, Lena would be far away, but the ghosts of that night. Lena drove for hours, the city lights slowly giving way to empty highways and darkened fields. Her mind raced, replaying every moment in vivid detail. The flash of the knife, the look of shock on Alex's face, the way his body had crumpled to the floor. She clenched the steering wheel, her knuckles white as panic gnawed at her insides. She needed a plan, but all she had was the raw impulse to survive. She stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The place was deserted, save for the flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. Lena pulled up to the pump, her mind on autopilot. The attendant barely glanced at her, but she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. She paid in cash, her heart thudding in her chest. If anyone recognized her, it would all be over. Back in the car, Lena stared at herself in the rearview mirror. Bloodshot eyes, her face pale under the dim lights. She barely recognized herself. She hadn't planned to kill him. Not really. But now that it had happened, there was no going back. She had to keep moving, keep running, and hope that she could stay one step ahead of the police. As she hit the highway again, the thought struck her. She needed to dispose of the body. She knew the clock was ticking. The longer Alex's body remained in his house, the higher the chances someone would find it. How long before someone checked on him? Hours? A day? She couldn't be sure, but she had to act fast. Lena made a sharp U-turn, the car tires screeching on the asphalt as she sped back toward the city. She would take care of this herself, no half measures. It was either that or prison. She parked a few blocks away from Alex's house, careful to choose a spot where her car wouldn't draw attention. The neighborhood was still quiet, the late hour and oppressive summer heat keeping everyone indoors. She moved quickly, slipping back into the house through the same back door she had left unlocked earlier. The smell of blood hit her as soon as she entered the living room. Alex's body lay where she had left it, a dark pool of blood spreading across the floor. The sight turned her stomach, but Lena swallowed the rising bile. There was no time for hesitation. She grabbed a large plastic tarp from the garage, the kind Alex had used for painting, and laid it out beside his body. Every movement felt mechanical, her mind shutting down the horror of what she was doing. With trembling hands, she rolled his body onto the tarp, the sickening sound of his lifeless form dragging across the floor making her wince. She tied up the tarp tightly, securing the body like a bundle of discarded trash. Her breath was shallow, her heart hammering in her chest as she dragged it toward the door. The weight was unbearable, each step feeling like she was moving through quicksand. But adrenaline kept her going. Once outside, She struggled to heave the body into the trunk of her car, glancing around nervously. The streets were empty, but paranoia made every shadow seem like a threat, every flicker of movement like the eyes of a neighbor watching from a darkened window. With the body loaded, Lena sped off into the night, her mind racing again. She needed somewhere remote, somewhere no one would ever think to look. She had read about places, old construction sites, abandoned warehouses, spots where no one would stumble upon a corpse. But she couldn't make any mistakes. The slightest error could mean a lifetime behind bars. The drive took hours, the city fading into a sprawling industrial wasteland. Finally, she reached an old quarry she had remembered from childhood, now overgrown and forgotten. The place was perfect, desolate and hidden, far from prying eyes. Lena parked near the edge of the quarry, her headlights cutting through the darkness as she dragged Alex's body from the trunk. She could barely feel her arms as she pulled it to the edge, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her chest. With one final push, the body tumbled over the side, disappearing into the black abyss below. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her entire body shaking. It was done. Alex was gone. No one would ever find him. But as Lena turned to leave, headlights appeared in the distance, piercing the darkness like a dagger. Panic surged through her veins. Someone was coming. She scrambled back to the car, trying to stay calm, but her hands fumbled with the keys. The car wouldn't start, her fingers shaking too violently to turn the ignition. The lights were getting closer now, and Lena's heart raced. She finally got the engine to roar to life, pulling away from the edge just as the vehicle in the distance came into full view. It was an old pickup truck, crawling along the quarry's edge, its beams sweeping the area. She drove off, glancing in the rearview mirror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Had they seen her? Would they remember her car? Her mind was in overdrive, replaying every moment, every possible mistake she had made. The body was gone, but the danger wasn't. As she fled the scene, her thoughts spiraled. She had crossed the line. There was no returning to normal life. Every second from now on would be spent looking over her shoulder, fearing the knock on her door, the sirens that would finally catch up to her. Lena had escaped for now, but deep inside, she knew the truth. You can never run from murder. Lena's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she sped down the dark, empty highway, her knuckles white. The night seemed endless, stretching before her like a black void, swallowing everything. Her mind buzzed with fear and adrenaline. But beneath it all was the creeping realization that no matter how fast she drove, how far she went, she could never truly escape. She had dumped the body in the quarry. Alex was gone, buried beneath the rubble and dirt where no one would ever find him. But now every passing car, every flicker of headlights in the distance, felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She couldn't shake the paranoia that had gripped her since leaving the quarry. Had the driver of the pickup truck seen her? Would they report her car? Or worse, had they followed her? Her heart raced as she passed another set of headlights. She imagined the police catching up to her, surrounding her, dragging her from the car in cuffs. Her breath hitched, and she forced herself to calm down. She needed a plan. She couldn't fall apart now. Panic would only get her caught. She had to keep her head. Get rid of the evidence, she thought. The tarp, the knife, the blood-stained clothes. All of it had to disappear. There could be no trace linking her to Alex's death. Lena knew she couldn't go home. The police would likely be looking for her soon. Maybe Alex had friends who would notice he was missing. They'd ask questions, and it wouldn't take long for someone to mention her. She needed to get rid of her car. It was old and beat up, and if anyone had seen it near the quarry, it would be easy to identify. Driving it around was a risk she couldn't afford. She pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of a small town, parking near the back where the lights were dim. Lena rummaged through the trunk, grabbing the blood-stained tarp, her clothes, and the knife. She shoved them into a black garbage bag, tying it tight, her hands shaking. She found an old gas can in the trunk, leftover from when Alex had insisted on keeping one in case of emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on her. She walked a few blocks away, stopping in a secluded alley between two abandoned buildings. It was dark, the kind of place where no one asked questions. She doused the garbage bag in gasoline, her heart hammering as she struck a match. The flame flickered in the cool night air, casting eerie shadows on the walls. For a second, Lena hesitated, watching the flame dance in her hand. But there was no turning back now. She dropped the match onto the bag, and flames quickly engulfed it, hissing and spitting as the fire ate away at the evidence. The smell of burning plastic and gasoline filled her nose, but Lena stood there, transfixed, watching the flames consume her guilt. She imagined the fire purging her of what she had done, wiping the slate clean. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that easy. Once the fire had reduced everything to ash, Lena hurried back to her car. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her. The paranoia gnawed at her, an invisible predator stalking her every move. She drove aimlessly for hours, knowing she couldn't return to her apartment. It wasn't safe. They'd find her there. The realization hit her hard. She had nowhere to go, no friends to trust, no family who wouldn't ask questions. She was alone, and the weight of her crime was bearing down on her, crushing her. Lena pulled over at a dingy motel on the edge of a forgotten highway, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or why you needed a room. She paid in cash, avoiding the bored gaze of the man behind the counter. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he slid the key across the desk without a word. The room was grim, with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell that clung to everything. But it was a place to hide. Lena collapsed on the bed, staring up at the stained ceiling, her mind racing. She couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, someone would come looking for Alex. They'd start asking questions. And then there was the truck. What if the driver had seen her? What if they had followed her from the quarry? Every creak, every distant sound outside made her jump. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was coming for her. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of police sirens in the distance. Her heart leapt into her throat. She bolted upright, staring out the grimy window. The sirens grew louder, closer. For a moment, panic surged through her. Had they found her? Were they coming for her now? She grabbed her bag, heart pounding, and threw open the door, only to freeze. The sirens wailed past the motel, disappearing into the distance. Lena stood there, shaken, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was unraveling. Over the next few days, the paranoia consumed her. She couldn't stop thinking about the truck at the quarry, the possibility that someone had seen her. Every time she heard a siren or saw a police car, her chest tightened, and she thought for sure they were coming for her. Then, one evening, while scrolling through the news on her phone in the dingy motel room, she froze. There it was, a headline: Body of local man discovered in quarry. Lena's blood ran cold as she clicked the article. It was Alex. They had found him. The article mentioned a suspicious death, and that police were investigating. Her heart hammered in her chest. They knew. It wouldn't be long before they traced it back to her. She had been careful. She had cleaned up, burned the evidence. But the body was a mistake. She should have buried it deeper, should have been more thorough. Now it was only a matter of time before they connected the dots. The pickup truck, any witnesses, her connection to Alex. She was running out of time. Lena's mind raced, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She couldn't stay here anymore. She had to leave. Maybe leave the country. Maybe disappear for good. But there was a gnawing fear that no matter how far she ran, the police or her own guilt would eventually catch up to her. In a flash of desperate resolve, Lena grabbed her things and bolted out of the room. She was back in the car, engine roaring to life as she sped away from the motel. The night swallowed her whole once again, but this time, she knew there was no escaping. No matter how far she went, the blood on her hands would always mark her for what she had become. A murderer on the run, haunted by the ghost of the man she had loved and killed. The road stretched endlessly before Lena as she drove into the black abyss of night, her mind spinning faster than the tires of her car. She had no destination, no plan, just the overwhelming urge to flee. But the truth gnawed at her. No matter where she ran, she couldn't outrun herself. For days, she had been moving from town to town, never staying in one place too long. Her money was running out, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. The news reports were everywhere now. Alex's face plastered across screens, the story of his death growing more suspicious by the hour. The police hadn't named her yet, but Lena knew it was only a matter of time. They were closing in, and she could feel it in every passing siren, every glance from a stranger. She had abandoned her car 2 towns back, knowing it was a ticking time bomb of evidence. Now, she stood at the edge of a rusting old bridge, staring out over the river below. The water churned dark and cold, reflecting the stormy sky above. The roar of the current filled her ears, drowning out the chaos in her mind for a moment. Lena looked down at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably, as if her body was rebelling against her. The same hands that had held the knife. The same hands that had taken a life. She couldn't escape what she had done. No amount of distance or running would ever erase the horror of that night. Alex's face haunted her dreams. His voice whispered in her ears when she was alone. What had she become? She thought killing him would end her pain, that it would give her back control. But all it had done was unravel her completely. She was a hollow shell, eaten alive by guilt and fear, and there was no escape. Not from this. In the distance, she heard the faint wail of sirens, growing louder with each passing second. It was them. They had found her. Panic surged through her veins, but something else was there too. Exhaustion. She had been running for so long, running from the police, from her crime, from herself. And now there was nowhere left to go. Lena stepped up onto the edge of the bridge, the cold wind biting at her skin. The river raged below her, its icy water crashing against the rocks. She stared down into the darkness, her breath coming in shallow gasps. There was only one way this could end. The sirens grew closer, and flashing lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the night. She could see the police cars now, speeding toward her, their lights reflecting off the water like broken promises. It's over, she thought. For a moment, Lena hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest as her body swayed on the edge. She thought about Alex, about the life she had destroyed, about the life she could never have back. She had wanted so much love, control, peace. But all she had found was chaos, and she couldn't live with it any longer. The sirens were deafening now, the police cars screeching to a halt behind her. She could hear the shouts, the frantic voices calling her name. But it was too late. It had always been too late. With one final breath, Lena stepped forward and plunged into the cold, unforgiving water below. The river swallowed her whole, the icy current pulling her under, dragging her deeper and deeper into the dark abyss. As the water closed over her, Lena felt a strange sense of calm, as if the weight of everything, the murder, the guilt, the fear, was finally being washed away. The river took her down, farther than she had ever run, until there was nothing left but silence. The police arrived at the bridge, searching the waters, but it was too late. Lena had disappeared into the depths, leaving only ripples in the river and the echoes of a life shattered by jealousy. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was free. But freedom had come at the highest price. The lights of the patrol cars faded into the night, the rain beginning to fall softly. Somewhere far below, the river flowed on, carrying Lena's broken soul into the unknown, forever lost to the darkness.